Have you ever felt the world tilt on its axis while your feet stay perfectly still? I have. I felt it on a Tuesday morning in October, standing in the cold grass of Millhaven Cemetery, watching them lower a casket into the ground. My wife's casket, while a man I'd never spoken to in my life grabbed my elbow and whispered 4 words that changed everything. "Sir, that box is empty." I turned to look at him. He was a groundskeeper, maybe 50, with dirt under his fingernails and red eyes like he hadn't slept in 2 days. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring straight ahead at the grave, jaw tight like he was forcing himself not to run. "What did you say?" I kept my voice low. The priest was still speaking. My daughter was crying into her husband's shoulder 20 feet away. He pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm. Didn't look at me. Just said, "Storage unit on Route 9. Birchwood Self-Storage. Number 11. Go today. Don't tell anyone where you're going." Then he stepped back and disappeared behind the tree line like he'd never been there at all. My name is Harold. No, wait. People always get confused when I start that way. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter as much as what happened. What matters is that I was 63 years old, retired from 31 years working quality control at a mid-sized paper manufacturer outside of Dayton, Ohio, and I had just buried my wife of 38 years. Or so I thought. Her name was June. Juniper Ann, though nobody called her that except her mother, God rest her soul. She was 61. She was supposed to have another 30 years in her. The doctors said it was her heart. Sudden cardiac event, they called it. Which is a very clean way of saying your wife was eating breakfast on a Thursday morning and then she wasn't anymore. I found her at the kitchen table. Coffee still warm. The window over the sink was open, and I remember the curtains were moving in the breeze, and I stood in the doorway for probably 10 seconds before my brain caught up with what my eyes were seeing. We'd been through everything together. Our daughter, Patsy. The layoffs in '09 when I thought I was going to lose the house. June's mother moving in with us for 4 years before she passed. 2 miscarriages that we never talked about but never forgot. 38 years is a long time. Long enough that you stop seeing the person clearly. Sometimes they just become the shape of your days, the sound of the house, the weight of the other side of the bed. I grieved. Of course I grieved. The 2 weeks between her death and her funeral I barely remember. My brother-in-law, Ned, June's older brother, handled most of the arrangements. I was grateful for that at the time. I was in no shape to make decisions. Ned drove over from Columbus, stayed in the guest room, answered the phone, wrote checks. He'd always been capable that way. Organized, efficient. June used to say he could run a country if he ever slowed down long enough to want to. What I didn't notice in those 2 weeks was that Ned never cried. Not once. Not at the house when we were going through her things. Not at the visitation. Not standing at the graveside. I didn't notice because I was too busy falling apart. And because Ned had always been like that, composed, contained, the kind of man who considered visible emotion a form of weakness. I'd known him for nearly 40 years, and I could count on one hand the times I'd seen him visibly moved by anything. So I didn't read anything into it. I just accepted his help and thanked God he was there. The funeral was at 10 in the morning. A small thing. June would have wanted that. She hated fuss. 40-something people, mostly from our church, a few old neighbors, a couple of her friends from the quilting group she'd been part of for 20 years. Patsy flew in from Portland with her husband and their 2 kids. My grandson kept tugging at his collar. My granddaughter held my hand the whole time. And then the groundskeeper appeared at my elbow and everything I thought I knew cracked down the middle like old wood. I stood there through the rest of the service with that folded piece of paper in my fists and my heart going about 140 beats a minute. I shook hands. I thanked people for coming. I let Ned drive me back to the house, and I sat in the passenger seat watching the trees go by on Route 12, and I thought very carefully about what to do next. Ned made coffee when we got home. Patsy and her husband arrived 20 minutes later with the kids. Everyone was kind and subdued, and there was too much fruit on the kitchen counter that people had dropped off. Casseroles and pound cakes and a tin of those butter cookies that come in the blue tins that nobody actually likes but everyone gives anyway. I waited an hour. Then I told them I needed some air, that I was going to take a drive, that I'd be back by dinner. Ned looked at me for just a second longer than necessary. "You sure you should be driving?" he said. "I'm fine," I said. "I just need to move." He nodded and looked away. And I walked out to my truck, and I drove to Birchwood Self-Storage on Route 9. The place was exactly what it sounds like. A long row of corrugated metal units off a 2-lane road about 8 miles from our house, surrounded by gravel and a chain-link fence with a keypad at the gate. I'd driven past it probably 1,000 times, never had a reason to stop. I punched in the code written on the paper. The gate opened. Unit 11 was near the back of the second row. The lock was the kind with a combination dial, and the combination was on the paper too. I stood in front of that door for what felt like a long time. The gravel was wet. It had rained that morning just before the service, and everything smelled like cold mud and dead leaves. How do you prepare yourself for what might be on the other side of a door like that? I was 63 years old. I'd just come from my wife's funeral, and a man I didn't know had handed me a piece of paper and told me to go there. Every rational part of my brain was saying this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, a cruel prank by someone unhinged. My hands were shaking, not from cold. I turned the dial. I pulled open the door. She was sitting in a folding chair about 10 feet back from the entrance, wrapped in my old green camping blanket, with a battery-powered lantern on the floor beside her, and a paperback novel open in her lap. She looked up when the door opened, and the look on her face when she saw me. I don't have words for that. I've been trying to find words for it ever since, and I can't. It was June, my wife, alive, in a storage unit off Route 9, looking at me like she'd been waiting for this moment and dreading it in equal measure. I didn't say anything for a long time, neither did she, and she closed the book. "Sit down," she said, very quietly. "I'll explain everything. But first you have to promise me you won't call Ned." I pulled up the other folding chair. There were 2 of them, I noticed, like she'd been expecting a visitor eventually. There was also a cooler, a small bag of clothes, a phone charger plugged into a portable battery pack. She had thought this through. "How long?" I said. That was the first thing I could manage. "Since Wednesday," she said, the day before she died. "June," I said, and then I couldn't say anything else for a while. She gave me that time. She'd always been good at that, knowing when to talk and when to just let something breathe. After a minute, she leaned forward and she took my hands in hers, and her hands were cold from the storage unit, but solid and real, and she said, "I'm going to tell you something that's going to make you very angry, and I need you to stay calm because we don't have much time, and I need you to think clearly." I nodded. "6 weeks ago," she said, "I found out that Ned has been stealing from us for 11 years. I heard the words. I just didn't absorb them immediately. "What do you mean stealing?" She told me. It took about 40 minutes, all of it. Some of what she told me I understood right away. Some of it didn't fully land until later. But here is the shape of it. When my father passed in 2013, he left a modest amount in a trust. Not a fortune, but enough. About $300,000, managed by an attorney in Springfield. The trust was supposed to transfer to me on my 65th birthday, with June as the secondary beneficiary. Ned had helped set it up. He was the one who recommended the attorney. He was the one who handled most of the paperwork because I was never good with that kind of thing and I trusted him completely. What I didn't know, what June discovered 6 weeks ago when she was going through some old files looking for our homeowner's insurance policy, was that Ned had arranged, through a series of amendments to the trust documents that I had apparently signed, without understanding what I was signing, to redirect a significant portion of the trust to an LLC that he controlled. He'd been pulling from it in small amounts since 2014, slow enough that nothing would trigger any alerts, patient enough that it took 11 years for the full picture to emerge. $300,000 roughly had become about $60,000 by the time June ran the numbers. Ned had taken the rest. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "when you found out?" She looked at her hands. "Because I went to confront him first. I thought I could handle it. I called him. I told him what I'd found. I said I was going to give him 2 weeks to make it right before I went to an attorney." She paused. He was very calm. too calm. He said, "I understand, June. Let me look into it," like it was a clerical error. And then? And then 3 days later, a man came to our door selling guttering. Except he wasn't selling guttering. He left a note in my hand when he shook it goodbye. Said, "You should be careful. These old houses have so many hazards." She met my eyes. I didn't imagine it. I know how it sounds, but I also know Ned. And the thing is, so did I. I know Ned for 40 years. I knew how he operated. I knew that when he wanted something, he moved quietly, and he moved completely. I'd always seen that as a virtue. Competence. Efficiency. I just never considered what it looked like when it was pointed in the wrong direction. June had spent the following 4 weeks building her exit. She'd been to see an attorney in a town 30 miles away, paid cash, used her maiden name. She'd been to a financial crimes investigator. She put together a file. She had not, in this entire time, said a word to me, because she was afraid that I would confront Ned before the documentation was complete, and because she was afraid of what Ned might do if he felt cornered. She had, very methodically, begun to fake her own death. She'd gotten a doctor friend, a woman she'd known since nursing school, now retired in Tennessee, to help her create a credible paper trail around a cardiac event. Paid out of pocket. Untraceable to anything connected to Ned. The plan was to disappear for 2 to 3 weeks while the attorney filed with the Financial Crimes Unit, and then surface once Ned was already under investigation. By that point, he wouldn't be able to do anything to her without it looking exactly like what it was. The groundskeeper. His name was Boyd, and she'd paid him $1,000 in cash to slip me the note if she didn't surface within 72 hours of the funeral, was the one failsafe she'd built in case something went wrong, in case I didn't figure it out on my own. "You could have told me," I said again. "It came out smaller than I meant it to." She was quiet for a moment. "I thought about it 1,000 times. But you trust him. You've always trusted him. I was afraid that even with the evidence in front of you, you'd give him a chance to explain, and that would give him time to move, to disappear the money, or worse." She looked at me. "I couldn't take that risk. I'm sorry. I know that was a terrible thing to do to you." I sat with that for a long time. I thought about standing at that graveside, about Patsy crying, about my granddaughter holding my hand, about all the people who'd come and said kind things and brought those blue tins of butter cookies. I thought about Ned making coffee in my kitchen, calm and composed, having orchestrated all of it, the trust, the theft, the threat, possibly the entire pressure that drove June underground. How do you sit across from someone for 40 years and not see it? How do you share holidays and funerals and graduations and all the ordinary Tuesday evenings of a life and not know what's underneath? I've asked myself that question 1,000 times since that day in the storage unit. I still don't have a clean answer. What I know is that people show you what they want you to see. And if they're patient and careful and they've correctly identified your blind spots, they can keep a secret for a very, very long time. We sat in that storage unit until dark. June walked me through everything. The file, the documentation, the name of the attorney, the timeline. I called Patsy from my truck before I drove home. I told her I needed her to trust me and not ask questions yet, and that her mother was alive. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then she said, "Dad." Just that. One word. And I heard 38 years of her mother in her voice. I told her to stay at the house, to be normal, to give nothing away. I drove home and I sat at my kitchen table across from Ned, and I had the most controlled conversation of my life. He asked if I was doing all right. I said I was holding up. He refilled my coffee cup. I thanked him. We talked about the service, about whether I'd thought about what to do with June's clothes, about whether I was going to be okay rattling around the house alone. He was warm, attentive, completely convincing. I looked at him across my kitchen table and I thought, "You threatened my wife. You stole from my father's memory. You stood at her funeral and watched them lower an empty box and you felt nothing." I didn't say any of that. I finished my coffee and told him I was exhausted and I needed to sleep. He said, "Of course." Said he'd stay another few days to help with things. I said that would be good. Then I went upstairs and I called the attorney June had found. The next 72 hours were the strangest of my life. I moved through them like I was operating on two tracks at once, the visible track, where I was a grieving husband being helped by his devoted brother-in-law, and the invisible track, where documentation was being filed, and investigators were being briefed, and a very quiet, very methodical trap was being built around a man who'd made the mistake of underestimating my wife. Ned was at my kitchen table on a Thursday morning, 2 days after the funeral, when two people from the Financial Crimes Unit knocked on my front door. I was standing in the hallway when I opened it. I watched him from the hallway as they introduced themselves. I watched the color leave his face. I watched him glance toward the back door and then stop himself. "Mr. Calloway," one of them said, and they used his name, not mine. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." I didn't say anything. I just stepped aside. He tried to hold it together. He really did. He asked for a lawyer. That was the right instinct. But before they took him out, he looked at me. And I mean really looked at me. Not the performance he'd been doing for 40 years, but something raw and exposed. And he said, "You have no idea what you've done." I thought about June in that storage unit, wrapped in my green camping blanket, with a paperback and a lantern and a $1,000 backup plan, waiting. "No," I said, "you have no idea what she did." Ned left my house in a set of zip ties that Thursday morning, and he's not been back. June came home that afternoon. She stood in the front doorway, and she looked at the kitchen and the hallway and the curtains over the kitchen window, the ones that had been moving in the breeze the morning I found her at the table. I watched her take it all in. I watched her breathe. Then she turned around and looked at me, and I don't know what my face was doing, but whatever it was, it made her start to cry, which was unusual. June did not cry easily. 38 years I could count the times. I put my arms around her. She was solid and real and cold from the October air. "You scared me half to death," I said. She laughed a little into my shoulder. "I know. Don't do it again. I'll do my best." Patsy drove over an hour later and walked in the front door and stopped dead in the hallway when she saw her mother sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. I gave them some time alone. I sat on the back porch and listened to the sounds of the house, my daughter's voice, my wife's voice, the ordinary music of it, and I thought about how close it had come. How different that Thursday could have been. The legal process took most of a year. Ned's attorney fought every filing. There were delays in motions and a lot of paperwork that I am not qualified to fully explain. What I can tell you is that the court found against him. The misappropriated funds, plus penalties. The criminal charges took a little longer, but those came too. The money is mostly gone. He'd moved it, spent some of it, hidden the rest in ways that took investigators months to untangle. We recovered about a third. The rest we've made peace with. 38 years of marriage will teach you, if you pay attention, that the things worth grieving are not the things that can be counted. What I think about most, when I think about those weeks, is June in that storage unit. Making a plan, executing it precisely, trusting that I would find my way to her eventually, and building in a fallback when she wasn't sure. 38 years I thought I knew her completely. Turns out there was steel in there I'd never had occasion to see before. I told her that once, about a year later. We were sitting on the back porch, same place I'd sat the afternoon she came home. She had her coffee. I had mine. "I didn't know you had it in you," I said. "All of that. The planning, the whole operation." She thought about it. "You knew," she said. "You just never needed to see it before." I think she was right about that. I think there are people in your life, the ones you love most, the ones you think you know inside and out, who are carrying capabilities you've never seen. Because the ordinary run of a life, if you're lucky, never demands them. And then one day the ordinary run ends and you find out exactly who you've been living beside. I found out on the Tuesday in October in the storage unit off Route 9. I'm grateful every single day that I did. I keep coming back to one image. June in that storage unit, sitting in a folding chair with a paperback in her lap and a lantern on the floor, waiting. No guarantees. No certainty that Boyd would deliver the note, or that I'd follow through, or that any of it would land the way she'd planned. Just a decision she'd made. Carefully, quietly, alone. And then the discipline to see it through. That's what I think about when people ask me what I took from all of this. Not the legal outcome. Not Ned's face when the investigators said his name. What I took from it is the image of my wife, sitting in the cold, having done the right thing the hard way, and trusting that it would be enough. She didn't do it by being loud. She didn't go to the police the day she found the documents, didn't call me in a panic, didn't confront Ned in my kitchen over Sunday coffee and hope for the best. She thought it through. She built something airtight before she moved. That kind of clear-headed patience under pressure. When everything in you is screaming and the person you love is sleeping 10 feet away, not knowing the full picture. That is not something most people have. It is something you build, slowly, over a lifetime of deciding, again and again, to respond instead of react. I think about what it cost her. Not the money we've made peace with. I mean the weeks of carrying it alone. The act of looking at me across the dinner table every night, knowing what she knew and saying nothing. Because saying something too soon would have unraveled everything. That takes a particular kind of integrity. The kind that isn't about being seen doing the right thing. It's about doing it anyway. In the dark, when nobody's watching. Because it's the only thing you can live with. And Ned. I've spent a lot of time on Ned too, because 40 years is not nothing, and the mind wants to understand. What I've landed on is this. What he did was patient and methodical, and in some ways impressive, in the way that any sustained deception requires effort. But every choice he made over those 11 years was a withdrawal from something he couldn't replenish. Trust, decency, the right to stand at a graveside and grieve honestly. He spent it all, slowly, and by the time the investigators knocked on my door, he had nothing left to stand on. That's not bad luck. That's the math of how character works. It compounds in both directions. What June had, what carried her through, was the combination of knowing what was right and having the backbone to pursue it even when it was costly, even when it was lonely, even when the easier path was to let it go, to tell herself it wasn't that bad, to protect the peace of the household and the family, and the 40 years of accumulated goodwill that Ned had been quietly spending all along. She didn't take that path. She picked up the harder one, and she walked it to the end. I'm 63 years old. I thought I knew my wife completely. I thought I knew my brother-in-law completely. I was wrong on both counts in opposite directions. What the storage unit on Route 9 taught me is that the people who love you well tend to be carrying more than you realize. More strength, more clarity, more quiet determination than their ordinary days ever require them to show. And the people who mean you harm tend to be counting on you never finding that out. June found it. She found it, and she used it, and she came home. That's the whole story. That's all of it.